And we welcome you back to the Tuesday Night Tailgate for a special bowl preview edition. This is going to be a very different format for all the regular listeners out there. We're going to be taking a look at all 40 bowl games. We hope you've enjoyed the regular season. Certainly it's been exciting. We know who the Final Four are. Tim, why don't you tell everybody what to expect from this edition of the Tuesday Night Tailgate?
Yeah, so we got a special edition this week, Luke, as you said. We're not doing pretty much every usual segment that we do week to week. So if you're looking for that, we'll be back to doing that next week with the corned beef Reuben players of the week, the sliders of the week, the pretty good of the week, et cetera, et cetera. This week is all about the bowl games. We're going through all 40 bowl games. Luke, we predetermined who each of us were going to talk about. So we ranked the bowl games 1 to 40. We're going to go from 40 down to 1 because we'll start with the lesser bowls. We'll end with the New Year's Six and semifinal bowl games, the games that most people are going to end up watching. But we're going to look at this from really two different points of view. We're going to look at this from a who's going to win this game and a gambling standpoint. So especially if you're out there doing any college bowl pools, there's one in particular that I recommend. Then this will hopefully be a handy guide, and hopefully it'll help you know a little bit more about some of these other teams that maybe you didn't watch all season. So we rank the bowls 1 to 40. We have predetermined teams that we are discussing. So in some cases, these are teams that we actually do believe will win or cover, and in some cases, we are merely playing devil's advocate. So Luke, I'm looking forward to this one. Why don't we get going?
Yeah, Tim, I'm absolutely looking forward to this. Certainly some of these better reasons to win than others. We may not actually believe in the teams, but we'll give you reasons as to why you should bet either way. We're each going to have 1 minute to talk about these, except for the playoff games. We'll be doing 2 minutes for each of those teams. I'm looking forward to us. Tim, why don't you kick us off?
All right, starting off with the worst bowl game of the slate is the Nova Homes Loans Arizona Bowl. You can catch that on Tuesday, December 29th at 7:30 p.m. And unless you live on the West Coast, you won't be able to watch this anywhere else except for campusinsiders.com. So, Luke, I have the favorite here, Colorado State -3.5 against Nevada. So Nevada is god-awful in bowl games in their history. They've played 14 bowl games since 1948, and they've gone 4-10 in that stretch, including 7 losses in their last 8 bowl appearances. This is not a good bowl team. And neither one of these teams has really played strong competition this season, given that both fall outside the top 100 in strength of schedule. But the only convincing win on Nevada's schedule is a 17-point win at home against New Mexico. And their schedule includes embarrassing losses to UNLV, Wyoming, both of whom Colorado State beat convincingly. On the other hand, Colorado State, they entered this game with a 4-game winning streak, and 2 of their losses are by just a field goal to Minnesota and Colorado from the Power 5 conferences. Nevada got destroyed by both the Power 5 conference matchups that they had. This won't be a pretty game, but Colorado State is simply the better team in this Mountain West Conference showdown, and Nevada's bowl woes are going to continue here.
Tim, I'm going to get right out and say it. Nevada does not have a good passing game. That's hampered them all year. But what they do have is 2 1,000-yard rushers in Don Jackson and James Butler. That's good enough for a 28th nationally ranked rushing attack. They're right behind Alabama in rushing offense, and they're going up against this Colorado State rushing defense that's ranked 105th in the nation. Now, Nevada's turned the ball over just 12 times all year. Colorado State has turned it over 26 times. Nevada's in the top quarter of the country for fewest penalties. Colorado State's in the bottom 10%. So you can look to those factors to influence the game. The key really here for Nevada is going to be locking down Colorado State's combo of Nick Stevens at QB and Rashard Higgins at wide receiver. Stevens is really thrown to throwing picks. He's got 12 on the season, and with the right pressure, you can see that the Wolfpack can force turnovers, get great field position off penalties. And aside from those passing rushing stats, these teams, they're really actually evenly matched, and this, in my opinion, should be a pick-em.
All right, well, the 39th ranked bowl that we have is the AutoNation Cure Bowl. That is on Saturday, December 19th at 7 o'clock on CBS Sports Network. That's the first day of bowl games, so be sure to catch that one in prime time. Luke, I have the favorite here again. I have San Jose State -3.5. You'll be arguing for Georgia State +3.5. So here, what the important thing here is that the only aspect of Georgia State that you can pinpoint as a national strength is their passing game led by Nick Arbuckle, who happens to be a top 10 quarterback in terms of yardage, but he did so against a horrific Sun Belt pass defense. And San Jose State, on the other hand, despite being a 5-7 team, has the second best pass defense in the country, only behind the Georgia Bulldogs. So even with the explosive pass offense of Georgia State, they only score 27 points per game, which is 73rd in the country. And the reason for this is because their rushing attack is awful. They rank 124th in yards per game out of 128 FBS schools. So Arbuckle is really the only part of this offense that's going to be able to do anything. And he's there for the first time this season. He is facing a terrific pass defense in San Jose State. So Georgia State, it's the only thing that they have going for them. San Jose State, it's the best part of their team. 5 wins because of the pass defense. Sunbelt is barely even in an FBS conference. So given this, I think Arbuckle is going to struggle mightily in this game against San Jose State, and that the San Jose State's going to cover the spread.
Yeah, Tim, Georgia State, they're really playing with house money here against a team like San Jose State, who's backed into a bowl game with only 5 wins. And Georgia State went 1 for 11 last year. They had a bad start to this year. But like you said, they've developed a prolific passing attack. They won 5 of their last 7 and won the last 4 with a huge rout on the road against their rival, Georgia Southern. I have to look at the intangibles here, and they have to swing in Georgia State's favor. It's their first bowl appearance ever. They only have to travel 1 state away. They've really got nothing to lose, and they're led by one of the best senior quarterbacks in the country. In Nick Arbuckle, who you talked about, he's thrown for over 4,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, QB rating of 154, and he's had a carousel of a backfield with multiple guys that'll average at least 4 yards a carry. For Georgia State to win, they're going to have to get a bunch of possessions. They're going to have to pass against the number 2 ranked defense like you talk about, or number 2 ranked passing defense. The only way that I can actually see San Jose State winning this is to limit Georgia State's possessions by running the ball. But State's got a top 40 passing, scoring, and rushing defense, so we'll see. All right, our 38th ranked bowl game, the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, gonna pit Utah State and Akron out in Boise. You can watch this Tuesday, December 22nd, 3:30 p.m. on ESPN. I've got the favorite here, Utah State, -6.5. And the Aggies here, they come in losing 3 of their last 4, and senior quarterback Chucky Keaton's back. He's hopefully healthy after missing a really good portion of the season to injury. Utah State here, they're going to want to run the ball. They're going to want to do it a lot with Devontae Mays. He's averaging 5.5 yards a carry. He's got 842 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season, but they are going up against the nation's now number 3 ranked rushing defense. Utah State here, they absolutely cannot get forced into becoming a one-dimensional passing team, as they're only ranked 88th in passing yards a game. But Chucky Keaton, like I said, he's a great quarterback, and he's got dual threat tendencies, as you saw if you watched their game against Utah way back in the day. The key here is going to be getting a lead early and have the defense keep them in it, as Akron comes in near the bottom of the country in a ton of categories offensively. Now, the Akron offense isn't explosive, but they don't turn over the ball much. If the Aggies can come into this game with a mindset like when they played against Utah or Boise, they'll win. I think they get the win here, but don't cover. Tim?
Yeah, and what Akron lacks in bowl game experience, it's their first one since 2005 and only the second in program history. They have with head coach Terry Bowden, who coached Auburn from 93 to 98, and he has an Independence Bowl and a Peach Bowl under his belt, 2-1 in bowl games in his head coaching history. The season's long statistics, like you said, they're in the bottom of a lot of categories, but it's deceiving a bit because this is a team that struggled mightily early in the season with some big losses to better teams. But this is certainly an uptrending team that is finally starting to score more points against weaker opponents. And at the end of the season, Utah State is that type of weak team that they can beat, if not cover the 6.5 spread. And of note here with the 6.5 spread is that Akron is 4-1 in their last 5 games against the spread, and Utah State is 1-4. So Vegas is having a lot of trouble trying to value either one of these teams. And when that happens, you always go for the uptrending underdog.
All right, moving things on to our next game, the Popeyes Bahamas Bowl in Nassau. 2 highly touted passing offenses in the Western Michigan Broncos versus the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders. I've got the favorite here, Western Michigan -3.5. You can watch this game Thursday, December 24th at noon Eastern on ESPN. Now, Western Michigan in this game, they're averaging about 35 points per game and nearly 500 yards on the season. They had a tough start to the season playing Michigan State and Ohio State very early. They've been up and down from there, had a really strong record in the MAC, though, at 6-2. They're led by quarterback Zach Terrell, over 3,000 yards and 27 touchdowns, and a really fantastic wide receiver duo in Daniel Braverman and Corey Davis. They're each averaging over 100 yards a game and had 11 and 12 touchdowns respectively. Now, while MTSU has a good passing game as well, their numbers are a little bit inflated, in my opinion, from blowout wins against Jackson State and Charlotte. On top of that, they really don't have any studs in the backfield, but they do come in ranked 34th in rushing, and they get nearly 200 yards a game there. Middle Tennessee, they've got a 93rd ranked passing defense. A lot of play actions probably is what I expect from Western Michigan, and that Braverman-Davis combo are going to be too hard to stop. Expect P.J. Fleck and company to row the boat in his first bowl win in school history and cover the spread. Tim?
Yeah, and Middle Tennessee, like you said, they have a very underrated passing game because their quarterback Brent Stockstill, he's not exactly a well-known name in college football, but he definitely has two stud receivers to help him out. You know, Richie James and Marquise Beatties. They combined for over half the team's receptions. Richie James, 100 catches for over 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's the third most catches in the country. And you have Ed Marquise Beatties, 77 catches for 960 yards. 13 touchdowns. So he's one of only 7 players in the country with 13 touchdowns. And Western Michigan, they don't have a terrible pass defense, but they really have struggled against some of the top receivers in the country. Aaron Burbridge, Mike Thomas of Ohio State, Jordan Reed of Ohio, Bowling Green, Roger Lewis, and Garrett Dieter. And then for NIU, Kenny Galladay. These guys all had big games against Western Michigan. So they really struggle against the star receivers. And I don't think Western Michigan's going to really be up to the challenge of keeping Middle Tennessee receivers in check, especially in the red zone situations with Beatties. So I think that if Middle Tennessee can get the passing game going, they can win this game and they can score a lot of points. All right, in our 36th ranked bowl, the St. Petersburg Bowl on Saturday, December 26th at 11 a.m. on ESPN. So don't get too hungover on Christmas because you're going to want to wake up and watch this one, even though it's 37th ranked out of 40. Luke, this is between Marshall -4.5 and UConn. I have Marshall here. And look, this game is going to be a defensive battle. It's both ranked in the top 20 in points allowed per game. But the difference in this game is that although Marshall doesn't have the same offensive numbers that it's had in recent seasons, UConn's offensive numbers are absolutely atrocious. They average just 17.8 points per game, which is 118th in FBS and the lowest of all 80 teams that are playing in the bowl games. Their defense was good enough to get them to the bowl games, but scoring points is really UConn's kryptonite. They only have 5 games this season where they've scored over 20 points, including wins against Villanova, Army, an incompetent UCF, USF, and Houston. On the flip side, Marshall's offense has been held to fewer than 20 points just once back in September in a loss to Ohio, and they have 9 games of 30-plus points. So even though Bob Diaco and his defense is going to be the centerpiece of UConn, they're going to need Bryant Shreffs or Arkiel Newsome or somebody to get some points because surely 20 points is not going to be enough to beat this Marshall offense. And it's not UCF that's going to be stepping on the field on that Saturday.
Yeah, Tim, no doubt it's a hard pick for me to make. Their wins are not strong. But what UConn did do this year is they ended Houston's perfect record. And defense is their team identity. It's a top 25 unit that holds opponents to under 20 points per game, and they're outstanding at defending the pass. But things really start to get on the bad side of the ball when you've got a bottom 10 offense that's, like you said, just averaging 17 points a game. They've been held to single digits 3 times this year. And really, you just don't know what you're going to get out of the Husky offense. You know, Bryant Sheriffs has struggled, and he's looked great at the same time, and he can extend the game on the ground. I'm really looking forward to see if he can throw it 25 or more times because interceptions have hurt their offense this year. I'm also looking forward to seeing how Bob Diaco utilizes Arkiel Newsome out of the backfield. And really, the only thing I've got going here is that UConn's played a much tougher schedule in the American than Marshall has, but they simply don't have the weapons here. I think they lose, but at least keep it within a touchdown.
All right, so moving on to our 35th ranked bowl, the Quick Lane Bowl. This is going to be the first time we talk about an FBS Power 5 team, Luke. This game is being played on Monday, December 28th at 5 p.m. on ESPN2. I have Minnesota -6.5 here. Luke, you'll be discussing Central Michigan at +6.5. And look, obviously Minnesota, they're a 5-7 team. They're one of 3 5-7 teams that got in. So it is difficult to make an argument that they are a touchdown favorite over anybody. But I'll take a 5-7 Big Ten team over a 7-5 MAC team any day of the week. And Minnie has had some tough breaks this season. You know, they had a chance to knock off TCU in the first night of college football season. They fell by 1 measly yard short of beating Michigan, and they lost to Iowa, who is fifth in the country by just 5 points. Central Michigan, on the other hand, is 0-3 against Power 5 schools this season with losses to Oklahoma State, Michigan State, and Syracuse. And granted, Minnesota's offense is nothing to get excited about, but Central Michigan is entirely based on the passing game, and Minnesota's main strength is their secondary and their pass defense. Central Michigan, they're really going to struggle to move the ball because of their bad rushing game, and it won't allow them to set up the Michigan game, the passing game. So while the pass game is good enough in a higher scoring MAC conference, I don't think it's going to be a match against a Big Ten secondary.
I have a hard time believing this line is what it is, and it's only there because Minnesota's a Power 5 team. Look, Central Michigan's got a 7-5 record. 2 of those losses came against Michigan State and Oklahoma State, but Central Michigan finished in a 3-way tie for the top of their division in the MAC. These two teams are actually a lot alike, despite the two wins and losses differential, with an edge really only going to Minnesota on the ground game. Central Michigan certainly has the edge in passing, like you talked about, if that's your flavor, and they're playing in their own state here. The team is built on passing and stopping the pass. They've got the MAC's best passing defense that allowed 189 yards a game, and they kept opponents to an average of 22 points in that high-scoring MAC offense. The offense themselves, they were outstanding, led by Cooper Rush, who threw for over 3,700 yards and 25 touchdowns. 5 different receivers have over 500 yards. No doubt Minnesota played a tough schedule against some great and highly ranked teams, but they backdoored their way into 5 wins here. I like Central Michigan to get at least 4 touchdowns against what has been a shaky Minnesota secondary as of late. Okay, the number 34 ranked bowl we have is the Gildan, New Mexico Bowl in Albuquerque. A home game here for the Lobos, but I've got the Arizona Wildcats in this one. You can watch this game Saturday, December 19th at 2 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. Arizona favored by 10.5 over the Lobos in this one. And this is kind of going to be a tough sell for me. It's not the bowl that Arizona fans expected coming into the season, but they've been decimated by injuries, especially on their defense. They're ranked 113th in total defense. They give up over 35 points per game. New Mexico comes into middle of the road at about 29 points per game here. They're marginally better at stopping the run versus the pass, but the good news is that Scooby Wright is coming back for this game for Arizona. He was the best linebacker and the defensive player in the country last season and a projected first-round pick before going down to knee and foot injuries in September. But really, there's just too many unknown things going into this game. The Wildcats have seen 3 guys get significant time at QB. All 3 have fared fine throwing the ball. They've combined for a 33rd ranked passing attack, going up against the 87th ranked passing D. Here it's currently unknown if their primary starter, Anu Solomon's going to get the start due to concussion issues, but no matter who's playing, for Arizona to win, they're going to have to win a shootout, keep New Mexico off the field. I think they've got a great shot to win, but not as believing in their chance to cover.
Yeah, and Luke, like you said, this is going to be a de facto home game for New Mexico, as the game is on campus at the University of New Mexico, and that's something that never really happens in these bowl games, because when you talk about this spread, it's usually because it's at least in a neutral field, even if a team happens to be closer to the stadium. So I think that the 10-point underdog here for New Mexico at home is a little bit inflated towards Arizona, given that they're a Pac-12 team. And what makes the comparison here is you look at UL Lafayette. They played in the New Orleans Bowl 4 straight years, and they won all 4 of those, 3 of which they won straight up as an underdog. And I think that is something that you can look to from a betting standpoint, that New Mexico, they don't have to travel. They're basically playing in the stadium they play every game in. So you look at the 10-point spread. This is a game they can win, let alone just cover. And as far as that spread, like I said, I think it's spiked in Arizona's favor, given that they're just in the Pac-12. But Utah's the only quality win they have all season. Wins against Northern Arizona, UTSA, Nevada. Those are not impressive to me if you're a Pac-12 team. And I think that the Wildcats are really going to struggle with this run game of New Mexico. You got Jarrell Presley and Terrion Gibson, who lately have been really increasing their game and getting a lot of touchdowns, getting a lot of yards out of that backfield. So I think that New Mexico is going to be very competitive in this game.
All right, our 33rd ranked game, the Camping World Independence Bowl. This is going to be Frank Beamer's last game, located in Shreveport, Louisiana, Saturday, December 26th, 5:45 Eastern. Pits the favorite, Virginia Tech, 13.5-point favorites over Tulsa. Now, this is the same Virginia Tech team that you've seen year in and year out. They've got a decent to good defense, a struggling offense. Michael Brewer isn't anything special at quarterback, but he's got real weapons around him in Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges at receiver, and a near 1,000-yard rusher in Trayvon McMillan. They'll average about 29 points per game, hold opponents to 24, which is going up against a Tulsa offense that averages 35 and a defense that gives up 38. There's such a mismatch here in that Virginia Tech's offense isn't necessarily explosive and barely a top 100 unit themselves, but the Tulsa defense is so bad. They're 2 spots out of last in the NCAA, giving up 531 yards per game. Keeping the ball away from Tulsa is going to be huge for the Hokies here. Tulsa runs the most plays per game in the country. Now, Virginia Tech's offense has struggled down the stretch. They seem to fail to click until later in the game, but I've got their defense keeping them in this game, winning, failing to cover.
Yeah, and look, Frank Beamer stuck playing Tulsa in the Independence Bowl in his final game as a college football head coach. That shows you how inferior this Virginia Tech team is compared to past Hokie teams. And the alert here is going to be that Beamer is in his last game, and that's kind of where maybe this spread is coming from, the 2 touchdowns. Vegas thinks that Virginia Tech's going to get out there and get a big win for the coach in his last game. But Beamer, he's only won half of his bowl games in his career. It's not like he's a great bowl coach. Looking at the game itself, Virginia Tech's strength is certainly the passing defense. But Tulsa is the 11th ranked, is ranked 11th in the country in passing yardage with quarterback Dane Evans. And the Hokies have not beaten a top 50 passing offense all season, with 2 of their 6 wins coming against bottom 5 passing offenses in Boston College and Georgia Tech. And the third coming against a 4-7 FCS team in Furman. So while Virginia Tech, they might be the better team overall, the fact that they're 2 touchdown favorites is absolutely absurd and can only be explained that it's Frank Beamer's last game. All right, our 32nd ranked bowl is the Raycom Media Camellia Bowl. That's going to be played on Saturday, December 19th at 5:30 p.m. on ESPN. This one pits Appalachian State against Ohio. Appalachian State, the 9.5-point favorite. Luke, I got Appalachian State here. And this is a very good team who's certainly uptrending. We all remember the 2007 Appalachian State team, not necessarily because they were FCS champs, but because they got the win over Michigan, one of the greatest upsets in college football history. And this is a very similar team to what you might have remembered back in that 2007 game. They have a very good defense, and they rely heavily on a very good running game when they have the ball on offense. Marcus Cox, Appalachian State's running back, he's a tremendous running back. And what Cox lacks in size, he certainly makes up for with his bursting penetration through holes. And even with a strong passing game, Appalachian State, they've managed to go 10-2 with their only losses coming to number 1 in the country, undefeated Clemson, and number 1 in the Sun Belt, undefeated in conference play, Arkansas State. So they don't have any bad losses on the season either. And this is a team that scored 40-plus points in 5 of their games this season, 30-plus points in just about every game this season. This is a very good offense. And a scoring offense, it's mixed with a little bit of lunch pail type of defense that's going to be too much for Ohio. And therefore, I think that Appalachian State not only will win this one, I think they can win by 10.
Yeah, Tim, it's hard to find something to like in this matchup for Ohio, but they do come into the bowl riding a 3-game winning streak, including a win over MAC West champion Northern Illinois. Ohio started out 5-1. They dropped 3 straight, and they're playing well again right now. I'm not sure who's getting the start behind center for the Bobcats, if it's going to be J.D. Sprague or Darius Vick, but it really hasn't mattered for them. No one has put up outstanding numbers, but their ground game has looked great as of late. The biggest question I have is that, sure, App State has a good offense this year and a great defense statistically, but they played a lot lower quality opponents. They've held 4 teams to 7 or fewer. Howard, Old Dominion, Georgia State, and UL Lafayette. So those numbers are a little bit inflated than Ohio has. So they gave up over 40 to Clemson and Arkansas State. Ohio's averaged 27 points per game on 425 yards. They look to hand the ball off a lot to A.J. Willett here as they're top 15 in short yardage rushing. The main stat I can point to in favor of the Bobcats is they're 6-0 against the spread in their last 6 non-conference games.
All right, so moving on to our 31st ranked bowl, the Zaxby's Heart of Dallas Bowl. That's going to be played on Saturday, December 26th at 2:20 Eastern Time on ESPN. This is going to pit Washington, the minus 8.5-point favorite, against Southern Miss. And Luke, Southern Miss's strength is, and what got them to the Conference USA Championship, is a very good offense. The Huskies, they have a very formidable defense and one of the most efficient defenses and special teams in the country. Strength of schedule matters here when you look at Power 5 versus Group of 5. At Washington, who's not known as a powerhouse by any means, they went 6-6 this season, but they had the 21st toughest schedule in Division I, and that includes a top 30 win at USC midseason. On the other hand, Southern Miss basically played an FCS schedule. Their strength of schedule ranks 135th in Division I, which means that 10-plus FCS teams had a more difficult schedule than Southern Miss this year. So it's not too difficult for Southern Miss to get some wins this season with that type of schedule. Southern Miss was beat up easily by Mississippi State, Marshall, Western Kentucky, and lost by 8 to Nebraska. And those were, quite frankly, the only competitive teams they even played this season. Washington is a very competitive team. They're very good on offense, and they should be able to continue that trend of Southern Miss just getting beat up by better football teams.
Yeah, hugely successful season for Southern Miss nonetheless, based off of previous years, as they closed out with 6 straight wins here before losing to Western in the Conference USA Championship. And like you said, their offense puts points on the board. They would routinely put up 30, 40, 50-point games all season, and only 4 more teams in the country have scored more touchdowns. They're led by Nick Mullins at quarterback. He's only put up over 4,000 yards and 36 touchdowns, a third of those going to 1,200-yard receiver Michael Thomas. Also, they've got a top 40 defense to boot going up against a mid-pack Washington offense. All in all, really, Southern Miss has put up points on the board thanks in large part to getting really good field position. But they haven't faced a defense as talented as Washington that allows only 18 points per game and is very effective at forcing turnovers. Now, they do have a chance in this game if Washington continues to struggle to finish drives in the red zone, if Southern Miss can limit their turnovers and their defense gets a lot of pressure on Jake Browning. All right, our next bowl is the Hawaii Bowl. Christmas Eve, Thursday, December 24th, 8 p.m. Eastern, Aloha Stadium in Honolulu. This one's going to pit the Cincinnati Bearcats, minus 1.5-point favorites, over the San Diego State Aztecs. And here, I've got the Bearcats. They're another one of these bowl teams that'll light up the scoreboard, scoring 36 points per game and putting up 559 yards per game. But when faced with a decent offense, you can go ahead and spot the other team 30 points right out of the gate. Luckily for Cincy, they're a top 5 passing offense led by former Notre Dame QB Gunnar Kiel. He can sling the ball all over. He's made some questionable throws, though, and thrown 12 interceptions. That's as many turnovers as San Diego State's given up all year. And the Aztec defense is good. They're top 5 nationally, but they haven't faced an offense as good or as fast-paced as Cincy's. The good news is Cincy's defense is a bit better at stopping the run, which is the Aztecs' bread and butter. They're going to have to get SDSU to beat them through the air, which is a complete unknown if the secondary will step up on Cincy. If the Bearcats can limit turnovers, sustain drives with running backs Hosey Williams and Mike Boone, get the ball to Shaq Washington and Chris Moore, they'll win this game even if they give up 30 because they have way too much offensive firepower. If you're betting anything on this one, take the over.
Yeah, and on the flip side with San Diego State, they struggled out of the gate a little bit, but then they won all 8 Mountain West Conference games, including the championship game over Air Force, who quite frankly was the only conference opponent who even gave them a fight this season, being that it was the only game within a touchdown in conference play. San Diego State, they've been consistently good throughout those final 8 games of the season, thanks to, like you alluded to before, their defense is tremendous against both the pass and the run. They're a top 5 defense in the country, and they have a tremendous running back in Donnell Pumphrey, who is probably one of the most underrated backs in the country because he's not a Derrick Henry or an Ezekiel Elliott or someone of that stature, and he's playing on the West Coast. But he's a very, very good running back, so look for him to get some big yards in a bowl game when he's on the national stage. Cincy, on the other hand, they live and die by the arm of Gunnar Kiel, like you said. And sometimes it's led to inconsistent results. Their only quality win this season against Miami early in the season, which is obviously a very quality win for them. But for the most part, they've just beaten up on teams that they are expected to beat. I don't expect them to beat San Diego State, and I think the way that San Diego State's playing, with their defense, with their running back, I think that they can win this game against Cincinnati.
All right, our next bowl matchup, we have at number 29, the New Era Pinstripe Bowl at Yankee Stadium. It's Indiana, 2.5-point favorites over Duke. You can watch this one Saturday, December 26th at 3:30 p.m. on ABC. So, all right, basketball and baseball fans, this is your matchup. Both of the teams here started hot. Indiana went down sooner thanks to a Big Ten gauntlet. They played Ohio State, Iowa, and Michigan to the wire in a 6-game losing streak, though. They competed and fell short against New Year's Six teams, but they got here thanks to road victories at Maryland and Purdue. They've got a good 3,000-yard quarterback in Nate Sudfeld and an offense that averaged 36 points per game and almost 500 yards. That's good enough for top 20 nationally, but their defense is really what kept them out of getting above 6 wins this year. They gave up over 37 points per game and 500 yards per game. They've also got the next to worst passing defense unit in the nation. They've allowed 35 or more points 7 times. What they are good at, though, is forcing turnovers, something that Duke has struggled with, and they don't have a great defense either. The biggest thing to watch out for in this game is going to be the injury status of UAB transfer running back Jordan Howard. He's questionable right now, but if he's healthy, I would take IU to cover thanks to their superior offense.
Yeah, and look, on the other side, Duke is a team that struggled at the end of the season, but Indiana, on the other hand, is a team that is going to want to rely on Nate Sudfeld throwing to a group of receivers of, Simi Cobbs Jr. and Ricky Jones. If Duke can force if they can force the Hoosiers to run the ball, they'll have a great advantage in this game because their passing defense is much better than their rush defense. And the argument against Duke is obviously, like I said, they're slumping ever since the loss to Miami, which really was a win if you count one of the 4 penalties that were missed. And, Indiana, they lost 6 straight games in the Big Ten in the midseason, and they really haven't beaten anybody good. Their signature win of the season is against Western Kentucky very early in the season. And they needed wins against terrible Maryland, Purdue, and, in order to become bowl eligible. So it's not like Indiana's on a tear either, despite Duke's recent struggles. So if you believe that Duke can play the defense, the pass defense against Nate Sudfeld and these receivers, and can find some of the success that they had early in the season, then Duke should be able to pull off an upset here in Yankee Stadium. All right, our 28th ranked bowl, the Foster Farms Bowl out in San Francisco. This one's being played on prime time the day after Christmas on the 26th on ESPN. This is going to pit UCLA against the third of the 5 and 7 teams that we're discussing in this bowl games, given that the could not fill enough bowl spots with 6 and 6 teams. So, Luke, I got UCLA here minus 6.5, and the only 2 teams to fire their head coach last season and then win fewer games this season are 0-12 Kansas and then 5 and 7 Nebraska. Somehow one of those 2 teams gets to play in a bowl game. Like I said, it's solely based on Nebraska's APR. They shouldn't even be in a bowl game because Nebraska's terrible. Schools like Nebraska, sure, they're expected to have higher IPR because they don't have the players that are good enough to leave early for the NFL. So of course they're going to keep people. They need college degrees for their other future careers. You can call Nebraska unlucky this season, but really the only convincing wins they have are against South Alabama, Minnesota, and Rutgers. They have a close win against Southern Miss, who I talked about before, having a terrible schedule this season, and a win that was absolutely given to them by the refs against Michigan State. I've been hearing that Tommy Armstrong is going to be the next great quarterback in the Big Ten for 3 years now, and if throwing more interceptions every single season is a sign of progress, then sign me up as a Nebraska fan. On the other hand, UCLA, they went 8-4 this season. They have a very, very young team led by tremendous freshman Josh Rosen. Nebraska has the 7th worst pass defense in the country, and a reminder that they play in the Big Ten, which is not exactly known for passing offenses. So this is going to be the Josh Rosen show all day after Christmas, and I can see UCLA winning this game by about 40.
All right, look, Nebraska's outclassed in this one in a variety of ways, and I, too, have had the displeasure of watching them play multiple times this year. They struggled to a 5 and 7 record, but that 5 and 7 mark is a little bit deceiving. 6 of their 7 losses were by single digits. The only one greater than that was a 10-point loss on the road at Purdue. And then the next week they came home and somehow beat a CFP semifinalist in Michigan State by 1 point, like you said, Tim. They play great teams tough. They struggle against the likes of Purdue and Illinois. Much of the problem has been the inconsistency of the guy you talked about, quarterback Tommy Armstrong. He's a hell of an athlete, but he's thrown 16 picks this year. All in all, they're minus 13 in turnover differential. On top of that, they don't have a great ground game, and their passing defense has really struggled, and that's bad against a QB as good as Josh Rosen. The best thing I've got for you in this is that if you see Nebraska approaching this game like the good Nebraska you saw against Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan State, Northwestern, they'll keep it close. If not, and what I expect to happen, is that they won't.
All right, so moving on to our 27th ranked bowl, the R&L Carriers New Orleans Bowl. This one's going to be between Louisiana Tech and Arkansas State on Saturday, December 19th at 9 p.m. on ESPN. And Luke, I got Louisiana Tech here. It's basically a pick 'em. Arkansas State, they've played in the GoDaddy Bowl for the last few seasons, and now they've won the conference championship. And I've seen a lot of experts out there predict that Arkansas State is going to be able to win this game against Louisiana Tech because of Freddie Knighton. But he's a 5'10 quarterback in a passing offense that is mediocre at best. And granted, they have a pretty good running game, but Louisiana Tech has a terrific rush defense. It's one of the top rushing defenses in the country. At least it ranks up there. And if you want to rely on the experts about Arkansas State passing game here, be my guest. I haven't seen it out of Arkansas State. I haven't really watched them, but the statistics don't really back it up for Freddie Knighton as much as maybe other quarterbacks in the Sun Belt. But I see Jeff Driscoll and Louisiana Tech. They have a legitimate offense. I think they're going to easily be able to counter, if not beat, Arkansas State in that regard. No matter what they can do on the offense.
Yeah, and don't overlook this one because these are two of the better G5 programs, and they're red hot. Both of them are. I love that I've got the Red Wolves here because they've won 8 in a row. They're undefeated in conference. They've averaged over 48 points per game across the past 2 months. Where they've really succeeded is the rushing attack from 3 different running backs in Michael Gordon, Warren Wand, and Johnston White. And quarterback Freddie Knighton, he's a huge threat to run as well. He may not be tall, but he can run the ball, and he has a decent, not stellar passing game. They've got a tough test on both sides of the ball, though. Louisiana Tech's got the second best Conference USA defense and an outstanding offense led by Jeff Driscoll. But if Arkansas State defense plays the way that they usually play and keep the Dogs to 4 or 5 touchdowns, I see them outscoring and winning the game here. All they have to do is be balanced, not solely rely on the run, and control the clock against that outstanding Louisiana Tech offense. Our 26th bowl is the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl. It's being played in Fort Worth on TCU's home field in probably one of the most drastically different offensive matchups, pitting Cal versus Air Force. Watch this one Tuesday, December 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. California is the 7.5-point favorite, and here's what you need to know. Air Force runs the triple option. They're third in the nation in rushing. They've got a top 40 defense, and they've only thrown the ball 80 times this year. Cal has a top 5 passing attack led by one of the top quarterbacks in the country, Jared Goff. He's got over 4,000 yards, spreading it out primarily to 6 receivers who all have at least 400 yards on the season. It's actually quite balanced, though, which it needs to be against Air Force's defense, which is middle of the road but a good deal better at defending the pass. Cal's about 55-45 pass run, but that's in contrast to averaging 370 in the air to 155 on the ground. Now, on top of that, Cal's in the bottom 25 in rushing defense, but they'll have 3 weeks to prepare for Air Force's triple option. Here's how I see it coming down. Each team's offense should blow the other's defense off the field in a stark contrast. Cal quickly, Air Force slowly and methodically. If you want to play the what-if game, Cal beat San Diego State, the team that beat Air Force in the Mountain West Championship early in the season and dominated on both sides of the ball in a 35-7 win. This game isn't going to be like that, but I do see Cal scraping out a win, even though Air Force is probably a little bit more motivated.
Yeah, Luke, and for Air Force, like you just said, Jared Goff, I can say nothing bad about Jared Goff. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country, for sure. But what to look for here is that Air Force has a terrific ground game, and I think that they can win the time of possession game. And they rank in the top 20 in the country with average time of possession. And that's going to be especially key when you want to bet Air Force with the points here, because that 7.5, if you're gambling on this game, is a big little trigger there because you want to take the points there. Goff has thrown for over 1,300 yards in his last 3 games, so it's going to be tough to stop that. But Air Force does have a top 25 pass defense. So Goff is coming up against a very tough defense here. And with that top 25 pass defense, Air Force has a top 5 running game in the country, which can be enough to win the time of possession. And it's not like Air Force won't be able to score with that type of running game. It's not like a Army that tries to just get 4 yards at a time. They scored 33.6 points per game thanks to the rush attack led by Carson Roberts, the quarterback. And then you have the running backs, Jacoby Owens, and the always explosive Timothy McVeigh. So Cal's offense is certainly scary. But given all this and the fact that Cal does not often blow out opponents because of their defense and that their coordinators are all distracted because they're all getting offers from other schools right now, I love the 7.5 spread here for Air Force.
All right, number 25, the GoDaddy Bowl. Wednesday, December 23rd, 8 p.m. ESPN. Dino Babers and Willie Fritz are gone for Bowling Green and Georgia Southern. Bowling Green comes in as the 7.5-point favorite in Mobile. Interesting matchup in the team that throws the ball more than anyone in the country versus the team that throws the ball the least. Now, in this one, Bowling Green, they're one of the top offenses in the country. They're top 25 in nearly every major offensive category, top 10 in a lot of them. If you had to choose a weakness for this team, you could say it's their run game, which is only 50th in the country. But they still have 2 running backs who have combined for over 2,000 yards in Travis Green and Fred Coppett. But this team is all Matt Johnson. He's only thrown for 4,700 yards and 43 touchdowns, both MAC records. The defense isn't standout. It's in the middle bottom end. They're top 75 and better at stopping the run than the pass. But what it has done is force turnovers, 27 of them on the season. And on the heels of an offense that's only given up 13 turnovers, that's good for 8th place nationally in turnover margin. The real test here is going to be, can BGSU stop Georgia Southern's number 1 ranked rushing attack? But I think that they can sell out to do it since Georgia State averages about 60 yards per game in the air. The only way I see Georgia Southern having a chance in this one is if they force Bowling Green to become one-dimensional by shutting down the run and eliminating the play action. I don't see him doing that and have the Falcons covering.
Yeah, Luke, and like you said, this is going to be the Bowling Green passing game against the Georgia Southern rushing game. And Georgia Southern, in terms of yards per game on the ground, they're the number one team in the country. And it's kind of an underrated rushing game because it's Georgia Southern. You don't know a lot about Georgia Southern. That's not the Alabama. It's not the Ohio State. It's not Stanford, who have some of these top backs in the country. But you have Matt Breida. He has over 1,500 yards right now, 10th in the country. He adds 16 touchdowns to that. He has 8.2 yards per carry. That's a ridiculous number for an average per carry for someone that gets a lot of carries on a season. You have two other guys on the team, L.A. Ransby. He has over 700 yards this year. The quarterback, Kevin Ellison, he certainly can run the ball this year. He has 8 touchdowns on the ground. And Bowling Green, they don't have a terrible rush defense. They fall just outside the top 50. But it's also certainly inflated by the overall weak rushing game that the MAC opponents get to face because there's not a lot of great rushing attacks in that MAC because they rely a lot on the pass, as Bowling Green does. So I think it's going to be important to note here that Bowling Green, they don't have Dino Babers. It's the same thing with Georgia Southern. Both these teams might get distracted a little bit, but it's going to come down to whoever can execute their game plan more, whether it's Bowling Green with the pass attack, Georgia Southern with the rush attack. And I think that certainly Georgia Southern can keep running the ball down teams' throats. All right, coming in at number 24 here is the Miami Beach Bowl. You can catch that one Monday, December 21st at 2:30 in the afternoon on ESPN. This one's going to be between Western Kentucky and South Florida, Western Kentucky being the 3.5-point favorite. So, Luke, I got Western Kentucky here. And look, Brandon Doty, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's absolutely torched every team that he's faced all season. So, to me, I'm wondering why this is only a 3.5-point spread in favor of the Hilltoppers. They've won their last 5 games by an average of 27 points, point differential there against their opponents. And other than the loss to the 5th-ranked LSU, the only close games that they've had all season have come in the first 3 weeks of the season. So once Doty got into his groove a little bit, he has absolutely destroyed every opponent that's tried to beat him. In South Florida, they can obviously score some points too, but their production comes from the ground game. So Western Kentucky, who loves to get in high-scoring duels, I don't think South Florida will be able to keep up with their ground game because they do have a bad passing game. And their defense certainly isn't good enough to contain Doty. So this isn't even a matter of, hey, can they stop Doty? No, nobody can stop Doty. And, if he just has an average Doty game, this is going to be Western Kentucky big.
Yeah, Tim, interesting spread on this one on an 8-4 USF team that's had its best season in 5 years with an early 1-3 start, a win streak, a loss to Navy, and a 4-game win streak to close out, including a 3-touchdown win versus then-ranked Temple. They played outstanding football during that stretch, and they're putting up a lot of points thanks to that outstanding ground game you talked about between running back Quentin Flowers and quarterback Marlon Mack. And Mack's a decent passer, too. He's gone over 2,000 yards, completed 61% of his throws, 21-8 touchdown to interception ratio. But what's really helped them is a defense that's allowed fewer points month by month as the season went on, to the tune of 21 points per game. Only FSU and Maryland early dropped 34 and 35 of them. On defense, they're more built to stop the run, which is a problem with Brandon Doughty, as you talked about, against the 61st ranked passing defense. I mean, Western Kentucky only had 2 games early where they haven't scored 35. USF hasn't allowed more than 35. Since Western has an average defense that's average at run stopping and not good versus the pass, USF has to realize that to win, they're going to have to do it in a shootout, run the ball effectively, and limit possessions. I do think they lose, though, as Western's offense is just too much.
All right, coming in at number 23 on our bowl rankings and analysis is the San Diego County Credit Union Poinsettia Bowl. Man, I got to take a break after saying that long name. But that's this one you can catch on Wednesday, December 23rd at 4:30 p.m. on ESPN. This one is Boise State against Northern Illinois, 2 teams that have played in the the BCS/New Year's Six bowls in recent years. Luke, I got Boise State here at -8.5. This is their 14th consecutive bowl game appearance since 1999. They're 10-5 in bowl games, so this is just a team that knows how to win these postseason games. They've won 5 of their last 6 bowl games, and most of which were against Pac-12 schools. So it's not even like they were facing bad competition, including the Fiesta Bowl last year against Arizona. Neither of these teams had a particularly tough schedule this season because their conferences were a little bit weaker than usual. But Boise State made a point to just absolutely beat up on lesser opponents this season. Jeremy McNichols, their running back, he's having a fantastic season. And the only players with more rushing touchdowns than McNichols this season are Heisman winner Derrick Henry, Navy's Keenan Reynolds, Houston's Greg Ward Jr., and Ohio State's Zeke Elliott. So that's incredible company that Jeremy McNichols is part of. NIU, on the other hand, they have significant quarterback concerns coming into this game. I think that's what's going to be the key to the game, to Boise State being able to win this game big. Drew Hare was having a great season, got hurt a couple weeks back. Ryan Graham took his place, but he underwhelmed and then got a concussion, and Tommy Fiedler just was bad in the MAC championship game. So he's going to be up against Fiedler in this game. He's going to be up against a Boise State team that has 22 interceptions on the season, and I don't think their running game is going to be enough to be the feature part of this offense. So I like Boise State being able to take advantage of that and winning big.
Yeah, Tim, this is a tough sell since Boise State's the better team in nearly every aspect of the game. Also, not sure who's going to get the start at QB for Northern Illinois. Second string Ryan Graham due to injury, or walk-on true freshman Tommy Fiedler. So judging their chances are really tough right now. But no matter who's behind center, they're going to be throwing to Kenny Golladay. He averages 15 yards a catch. He's got 1,100 yards on the season. To have a prayer here, NIU is going to have to force turnovers. And cornerback Shawan Larry is an interception machine. He's leading the country with 9 this year. Such a tough team to judge, especially right now without knowing who the quarterback is. But they played Ohio State tight, and on the other hand, they lost to Max Cellar Dwellers. Really, the best argument I have is that they're coming off their worst loss of the season to Bowling Green, with Fiedler starting in his first game and throwing 3 picks. Even there, they only lost by 20. Out of the other 4 losses, the worst was by 10. Out of all the teams they faced, only Ohio State had a better defense, and they only lost there by 7. So with that spread at 8.5, take your pick. Our number 22 ranked game is the Franklin American Mortgage Music City Bowl. I'm picking against my alma mater here at a game in Nashville. Texas A&M is the 2.5-point favorite over Louisville. Catch this game Wednesday, December 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. This was another year, another hot start for A&M, getting up to 5-0 before dropping 4 of their last 7. But this time it was the offense that sputtered and not the defense, as new defensive coordinator John Chavis is really turning things around in College Station. The Aggies have gone between Kyle Allen and Kyler Murray at quarterback, and with Kyle Allen announcing that he's transferring, I'd expect Murray to get the start here. Now, he's a dual-threat quarterback. The number one thing that I have to look for here is how U of L has fared against those types of quarterbacks, and I looked at their games against Houston and Clemson. Louisville lost both by 3, and Greg Ward and Deshaun Watson averaged about 4.5 yards per carry against them. But Houston and Clemson won those games by being incredibly balanced passing and rushing the ball. Now, living in Louisville and going to that school, I know that there's nothing there that fans and the team enjoy more than beating SEC teams. But overall, I think A&M has a raw talent, slightly better defense to win a close one, and add on to that the fact that Kevin Sublin needs to win here to avoid starting next season on the hot seat. I see them getting the win.
Yeah, and look, both these teams, they had much higher expectations at the beginning of the season. And they're both on the completely different paths right now. Like you mentioned earlier, A&M started strong, has struggled lately. Louisville's the opposite. They struggled early, and now they've been playing very well. And with A&M right now, with the way that they're playing, there's a lot of talks that if they lose this game, someone might be out. So they have that weighing on them right now going into this bowl game. Like you said before, Kyle Allen, he's not going to be playing this game because he's transferring out. Kyler Murray, who's out, he's seen time this year. He's been pretty good, pretty decent at least. He's expected to get the start for the Aggies. And you mentioned 2 dual-threat quarterbacks that Louisville has struggled against this year. Well, it's Greg Ward Jr. and Deshaun Watson. Their teams combined for only 1 loss, so nobody's been able to handle either one of those guys. Murray, on the other hand, is nowhere near the level of either one of those 2 quarterbacks. He's thrown 7 interceptions and only 5 passing touchdowns. That's a bad combination, given that Louisville is not going to be bad against dual-threat quarterbacks, just the top ones. They have a top 15 rush defense, and the team has 16 interceptions this year, so that's a good matchup against Murray, I believe. And, that's tied, the 16 interceptions, that's tied for the 4th most in the Power 5 conferences. So it took a while. Louisville offense is finally starting to consistently put more points on the board. And the extra motivation that they're looking to go 2-1 against the SEC if they can beat Texas A&M in this game.
Number 21, the TaxSlayer Bowl. Georgia, 7.5-point favorites over Penn State. Catch this one Saturday, January 2nd at noon Eastern, playing this one down in Jacksonville. Now, Georgia has been a circus all year after losing Nick Chubb early and head coach Mark Richt after the season, but that hasn't stopped their defense from being top 10 in yards allowed and scoring defense. Sony Michel's a perfectly capable running back, but really it's been their lack of a passing game that's held them back this year. Still, they were 9-3. They only lost to SEC championships participants, Alabama and Florida, and a really close one to Tennessee. And they come in this with a fairly ugly 4-game winning streak. On the other side of the field, Christian Hackenberg for Penn State's a good quarterback, but they've struggled to score down the stretch, in large part due to breakdowns in their offensive line. The biggest factor that I see in this game is Georgia's defense is really coming along perfectly in that area. They've gotten 15 tackles for loss in their last 5 games, and Penn State is 118th in the country in sacks allowed. I see UGA getting after him all game, their defense being too strong, and winning this one late.
Yeah, and like you said, Georgia just has no coaches right now. They fired Bricht and Jeremy Pruitt, the defensive coordinator, who was going to be the interim. He got hired by Alabama, as the defensive coordinator there, so he's already gone. Kirby Smart, he's going to be sticking along with Alabama because they're in the playoff. So their interim coach right now is Greg McGarity, who is the wide receivers coach, which is an odd choice for Georgia, who is not known for a passing game by any means. And really it comes down to he's the only possible interim who might actually be on the team next year. So they really have no coaches that have any motivation for coaching this Georgia team to a win. And like I said before, the passing game for Georgia is not really that great. They have Grayson Lambert, who's basically the quarterback by default. They've replaced him twice. First, they replaced him with Bryce Ramsey, who did so bad that he requested the coaching staff to make him the punter again. And then he was replaced by Phaeton Bauta, who completed just 40% of his passes, unless you count the 4 interceptions that he threw on the 33 pass attempts that he had. And on the other side of the ball, Penn State, they're a defensive team. So if you can tell me where Georgia can even score 8 points, let alone win this game by 8, power to you. All right, we're halfway through, and coming in at number 20 here is the Cactus Bowl between Arizona State and West Virginia. This game is going to be played on Saturday, January 2nd in late prime time at 10:15 p.m. on ESPN. Luke, I got Arizona State here. They're playing pretty close to home, given that the Cactus Bowl is played in Arizona. In Arizona, they faced a tough schedule this year, and despite the 6-6 record, they had a 2-3 record against top 30 teams, while West Virginia fell flat against better teams with an 0-4 record. So West Virginia gets to earn the right to lose a middle-tier bowl once again. They have a very capable running back with Wendell Smallwood, but they haven't faced a top 50 rush defense this entire season. On the other hand, only 3 players have 100-plus yards against Arizona State on the ground this season. Devontae Booker of Utah for 118, Royce Freeman of Oregon for 110, and Myles Gaskin of Washington for 108. And those were all some of the worst games that those 3 had all season. Wendell Smallwood's more comparable to Paul Perkins of UCLA or Philip Lindsay of Colorado, who both struggled against Arizona State, rather than the Booker or Freeman, who are more well-known running backs and better running backs at that. So Arizona State should be able to prevent West Virginia from being able to score points, at least on the ground. And obviously the way to beat Arizona State will be through the air, but West Virginia doesn't really have the skill set at quarterback with Skylar Howard and the receiver positions to be able to carry the entire offense against Arizona State. And I think that Mike Bercovici and Demario Richard will be able to do their thing on offense for Arizona State.
All right, home field advantage here for the Sun Devils. They're playing 11 miles down the road. Let's see what I got for this one. First off, I expect a shootout. This looks a lot more like a Big 12 conference matchup than an interconference bowl game. WVU's got the better defense. They're holding opponents to 10 less points per game, particularly when it comes to stopping the pass. ASU is without offensive coordinator Norvell, who's off to Memphis. Kind of a fairly even offensive matchup here, but I'd give the nod to the Sun Devils. Wendell Smallwood and Russell Shell have combined for over 2,000 yards and 17 touchdowns for the Mountaineers, and quarterback Skylar Howard can take off with the ball as well. He's got 661 yards and scored 6 on the year. He hasn't put up Big 12 numbers in the air, but that's been okay. He's still gotten over 2,600 yards and a touchdown-interception ratio of 21-12. My biggest concern here is that the Sun Devils have the second highest number of sacks in the country, and WVU's line has been collapsing and given up 30 this year. The best news is that the Mountaineers are not playing against a ranked team. Against unranked competition, they've averaged 40 points per game, and in 4 ranked games, all of them losses, that dropped down to 24.5 points.
All right, our number 19 bowl here is the AutoZone Liberty Bowl between Arkansas and Kansas State. This one's going to be played on Saturday, January 2nd at 3:20 on ESPN. That is not a random start time at all. Arkansas, I got them. They're the 11-point favorite here. And Luke, I've had a lot of these big favorites so far, and this is the one where I truly believe they're going to win by at least 40. I mean, outside of Alabama, Arkansas is the hottest SEC team since mid-October. They're 5-1 in their final 6 games, with wins at Ole Miss and at LSU, which are tremendous road wins, and the only loss coming in with a 1-point game to a very good Mississippi State team late in the season. Quite frankly, I don't think Kansas State is even on the same level playing field as Arkansas. Arkansas has more points per game, less points allowed per game, and they're statistically better in almost every area that you can possibly come up with. Kansas State's only advantage over Arkansas is the passing defense, and they're only better in that by 1.4 yards per game. So Arkansas definitely has a statistical advantage, at least on paper, going into this game. Kansas State, they rode a 6-game losing streak in the Big 12. Their only quality wins have come against West Virginia and Louisiana Tech, and the only convincing wins have come over South Dakota, UTSA, and Kansas, who have combined for a total of 3 FBS wins this season. Arkansas offense and defense both have a scary groove going on right now, so an 11.5 spread against an inferior Kansas State might be too low.
Okay, Tim, I know you hated having to argue for a Bielema coach team there, but I might have an even harder job because there is very little to like about the Wildcats. They've only beaten these other bowl teams in Louisiana Tech and West Virginia, and the defense is abysmal. The rest of the Big 12 routinely hung 50 points on them, and they put a ton of pressure on the offense. Heck, the best passer on this Kansas State team is the fullback. He actually has a higher completion percentage than both quarterbacks Huebner and Cook. The running game hasn't been outstanding either, as quarterback Huebner's just 40 yards less than their leading rusher, Charles Jones. So, yeah, I guess you could say Huebner has mobility, and he's taken in 13 touchdowns on the ground, but they don't even have a 500-yard receiver. There's really not a single thing I can point to that would lead you to take K-State to cover except this, and this is going deep. Kansas State is 6th in the nation in kickoff returns. They're averaging 27.5 yards per return, thanks to Morgan Burns, who has 4 return touchdowns this year. Arkansas comes in at 45th in kickoff return defense and has allowed 1 return touchdown this year to Tennessee's Evan Berry. Special teams might be a factor here. Coming in at number 18 for us this week, Birmingham Bowl at Legion Field, matchup of the Tigers. I've got the favorite Auburn. They're taking on Memphis. Auburn's 2.5-point favorites. Get this one Wednesday, December 30th at noon on ESPN. Now, first off, if you're listening to this for bowl pool previews, please do not think that Auburn is a good team. Another team where you just don't know what you're going to get at quarterback, Sean White or Jeremy Johnson. But here's the deal. Seriously, all they have to do is pound the ball against Memphis with Peyton Barber and Jovan Robinson and Kerryon Johnson. They're getting about 191 yards per game this season, so it's absolutely imperative they not get down early. You have to look to Memphis' loss against Temple and Navy here. The game plan is to control the clock and run the ball and let Memphis commit stupid penalties. Is Gus Malzahn smart enough for that? We will see. On defense, they're going up against one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Paxton Lynch, and that's a huge problem. But the Auburn secondary, as bad as it is, they're about 70th nationally, has given up surprisingly few touchdowns this year in the air. Opponents get them twice as often on the ground. Best advice that I have for you is be wary. Auburn has the better athletes. Memphis' head coach in Fuente has gone to Virginia Tech. And here's a number. Memphis is the 12th most penalized team in the country. Auburn is the 17th least. Tim?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Justin Fuente, he's off to Virginia Tech, so he won't be coaching in this game. They have Daryl Dickey, who's going to be taking over as the interim in the bowl game. And he was the play caller all season, so the play calling will not change for this team. It shouldn't skip a beat at all, despite losing the head coach. And this is actually Daryl Dickey's 5th bowl game that he will be the head coach in. So it's not like you have an inexperienced coach coming into this game. He had previously coached 4 bowl games for North Texas. On the flip side, you got Gus Malzahn. Sure, he's coached only 2 bowl games, and he's lost both of them. So you have a lot of bowl game coaching experience despite losing Justin Fuente to Virginia Tech. And Memphis has the win over an SEC team already this season at Ole Miss, who is a much stronger SEC team this season at Auburn. And they won that game comfortably. You know, Ole Miss was playing for a hell of a lot back then, too. Do you really think that Auburn, who was an AP poll number 6 in the preseason, is going to care about a bowl game just 2 hours away from their main campus against an American Athletic Conference team compared to Ole Miss, who was playing for a playoff spot back then? And Memphis is a top 10 team in the country in points scored per game. Auburn's defense is not that spectacular enough to be able to stop the onslaught from terrific quarterback Paxton Lynch, who many evaluators have said is the top QB going into next year's NFL draft class. So that alone, he's playing for a hell of a lot in this game, and I think that Paxton Lynch is going to torch this Auburn defense.
Number 17, the Belk Bowl in Charlotte. Two teams both playing their first Power 5 non-conference team. I've got Mississippi State in this one, minus 5.5-point favorites over NC State. Wednesday, December 30th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Overall, this is a decent year for Mississippi State. They were picked to finish last in the SEC West. They finished fifth. All four of their losses came to ranked teams in LSU, A&M, Bama, and Ole Miss. That's a gauntlet to get through. Dak Prescott's a phenomenal quarterback. He hasn't really had the tools around him to take Mississippi State to higher levels. But this year, he's only got 3,400 yards passing and 700 rushing on the season. Defense-wise, you want to say NC State has the advantage on paper. They did probably play the worst out-of-conference games in the country, though. And dual-threat quarterbacks didn't really run too much on State, and they won all by at least 2 scores. But they did pass very effectively, and the running backs had big, big games for the Bulldogs. I don't know if Mississippi State has had the backfield support and guys like Holloway and Shumpert to complement Prescott there. Nevertheless, I think the Bulldogs do have 2 great receiving options in Fred Ross and De'Runner Wilson to get the job done. Mississippi State's just too tough. Dak Prescott is too good. NC State is 0-4 at covering the spread when they're the underdog this year, while Mississippi State is 4-2 at covering as the favorite.
Yeah, and NC State's going to be a tough argument to make here, so even with the 5.5 points there. And a lot of talk in this game is going to be about Dak Prescott for Mississippi State. And even though maybe he didn't meet some of the lofty expectations, a lot of people were saying Heisman at the beginning of the year. He still had a good season. But Jacoby Brissett on the other side is a very capable quarterback for NC State. It wasn't until late in the season that NC State really finally started to take advantage of Brissett's running ability as well. I wouldn't classify him as a dual-threat quarterback, but he can certainly run the ball. And with this being his last game as a senior, it'll be interesting to see if head coach Dave Doran lets Brissett loose a little bit and be a major playmaker on the ground as well. Like many of these bowl matchups, and NC State has a terrific pass defense against a team that can pass the ball. So maybe if NC State's pass defense is able to contain Dak Prescott a lot, then maybe they can cover this game. And the main concern, if you're going to pick NC State here, is being able to contain Dak in the run game. So if you think that the defense is going to step up for the Wolfpack, then you can take them with those 5.5 points. All right, we're on to number 16 here, the Hyundai Sun Bowl. This is going to be on Saturday, December 26th at 2 p.m. on CBS. Unfortunately, Vern Lundquist will not be the play-by-play guy for this game. Washington State, the 3.5-point favorite over the Miami Hurricanes. Luke, I got Washington State here, so I'll talk about another Luke Falk. He's back to practice, and he'll be fully healthy in time for the Sun Bowl. And Falk is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He throws for more yards per game than Miami players can even count to. Listen to some of his stat lines this season. They're absolutely absurd. 50 for 74 for 505 yards and 5 touchdowns against Oregon. 47 for 62 for 514 yards and 5 touchdowns against Arizona. 39 for 50 and for 407 yards and 6 touchdowns over Oregon State. 36 for, it goes on and on and on. He puts up a lot of passes. He completes most of them, and he gets about 4, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns every game. This is a terrific offense. It's a Mike Leach offense. It's going to put a lot of points on the board. And all 4 of Miami's losses have come against very good quarterbacks in Hayden Moore, Everett Golson, Marquise Williams, and Deshaun Watson. And Tommy Armstrong, but like we mentioned before, he's not a good quarterback, so it's the only good quarterback, the only bad quarterback that they faced in that regard. Stumbled out of the gate, Washington State has had one of the most prolific offenses in the country. I think they're going to put a lot of points on the board against Miami. Miami won't be able to keep up.
All right, well, Tim, Miami at 8-4. They've largely improved since Al Golden got fired, and they come in winning 4 of their last 5. I actually see this as a really even matchup with Miami slightly better defensively, Wazoo obviously better offensively, and of course Luke Falk's back, so that's a cause for concern. But Gabe Marks is out for the Cougs, and that's huge as he's their return man as well as their best wide receiver. Wazoo is not a threat to run the ball at all, and Miami can focus on stopping the pass, and they're not too bad at it. They come in at 27th nationally. So I'm looking mostly at trends here. Quarterback Brad Kaya is playing lights out of late, averaging 9.1 yards per attempt and nearly 300 yards a game over the past month. Wazoo's got an average pass defense that doesn't give up huge plays, but it can be picked apart. Both of these teams are very, very motivated. They've turned around their seasons to get here, but if anything, Wazoo is too one-dimensional, and the Canes have played great for Larry Scott and should have no trouble putting at least 30 on the Cougs. Special teams being the difference with Corn Elder in what I think will be a close one.
All right, we're on our number 15 bowl game now, and we're finally getting to some of the teams that are ranked in the college football playoff. We're on the Marmot Boca Raton Bowl, which is going to be Tuesday, December 22nd at 7 p.m. on ESPN. You have the favorite, number 24, Temple, playing Toledo, who was ranked for most of the season. Temple is going to come into this game as the 1.5-point favorite. So, Luke, I got Temple here. With Temple, we talked a lot about the defense, and they can certainly score points as well, averaging over 30 points per game. Temple was favored in the majority of their games this season and still finished 9-4 against the spread, which tells you that Vegas has had trouble valuing, them against their opponents. By contrast, only 2 teams in bowl games have covered 10 times during the regular season. So 9 is a very high number, as almost every team falls usually between that 5 and 7 with a couple 8s and 9s in there against the spread. On offense, Jahad Thomas, he's clearly the strength of the offense, and the numbers are even skewed down a little bit considering he's been hurt a lot and he's been playing hurt. But he has over 1,200 yards this season and 17 touchdowns, which is a big number. Toledo does have an excellent rush defense, though, so P.J. Walker is going to have to throw the ball. And if he can throw the ball as he has been throwing the ball lately compared to early in the season, then Temple is going to have a good shot at winning this game. But the same can be said about Toledo with Kareem Hunt at running back and Philip Ely at quarterback. But Temple has a more proven defense that has remained competitive against better teams than Toledo has faced.
Yeah, a real mixed bag of elation and disappointment this year for the Rockets. We tracked them most of the year. Huge win against Arkansas early. Dropped a game to NIU at home last month. And dropping their last game at home to Western Michigan to lose out on their spot in the MAC championship game. They're also without head coach Matt Campbell, who left for the Iowa State job. But what they do have is the 26th ranked scoring offense, the 21st ranked scoring defense. Kareem Hunt and Terry Swanson are good options out of the backfield, both with over 800 yards, and Philip Ely at quarterback really needs a big game here. Temple's got a good defense that's really built to stop the run, but a lot more susceptible against the pass, so it's going to be absolutely critical to get a mix of both. The only problem is that Ely's been inconsistent all year, but to his credit, out of all the Toledo games that I watched, his receivers have dropped a lot of catchable passes. Not a whole lot to play here for Toledo as they lost the wrong 2 games. And I'm not really confident in them at all. But if you are playing the spread, Toledo's 3-0-1 against the spread in their last 4 non-conference games and 11-2-2 against the spread in their last 15 overall. Number 14 on our bowl games, the National University Holiday Bowl in San Diego, Wisconsin and USC. USC's the favorite, -3.5. First time they've played since 1966. This game's Wednesday, December 30th at 10:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Now, USC's really been a trip this season. They started off 3-2, fired Sarkisian, but they brought it together under Clay Helton. They only took quality losses to Notre Dame, Oregon, and Stanford after that. However, do keep in mind that they fired most of their defensive coaching staff this past week. Cody Kessler, quarterback, didn't really live up to his Heisman caliber expectations this season, but he still threw for over 3,000 yards at 68%, had a TD-INT ratio of 27-6, and they've also got a decent running game with Ronald Jones II. USC, they really don't have an outstanding defense, but I don't think that Joel Stave of Wisconsin is good enough to beat them. Wisconsin's defense will keep them in the game here, but I see Kessler to Juju Smith-Schuster tearing them apart through the air. Wisconsin, for me, they just haven't beaten anyone good because their offense cannot get it together. USC's too fast, too talented, and they've got too many options on offense to lose this one, and I expect them to cover.
Yeah, and Wisconsin, to start off, has allowed the fewest points per game this season in all teams in Division I, with 13 points allowed per game. They have the 4th best rushing defense in terms of yardage allowed and the 6th best passing defense. So this is a tremendous defense. The issue with Wisconsin, like you said, is scoring the ball. And again, like you said, USC fired most of their defensive coaching staff, so who even knows who's going to be coaching the defense in this ball game? And you mentioned Joel Stave before. Wisconsin has won 2 games this season where Joel Stave has thrown for fewer than 100 yards, which is a pretty pathetic number. But they've still won those games because they rely heavily on the running game, as they historically have done. And the running game is supposed to be a lot better this season. Corey Clement got hurt. He was supposed to be the guy that replaced Melvin Gordon. He got hurt against Alabama. He's only played 2 games in non-consecutive weeks since then. But if he can be healthy, this is a team that's going to be able to run the game. They're going to be the prototypical Wisconsin team that you would expect. If he doesn't, Dare Ogunbowale and Tywan Deal are very capable of sharing the carries and getting a lot of yards against this USC defense that has question marks without the coaching staff. So I think Wisconsin's going to keep this game close. you trust that Wisconsin will be able to run the ball, whether it's Corey Clement or the combination of Ugunbowale and Deal, then Wisconsin can be a good pick.
Number 13, the Military Bowl on Navy's home field in Annapolis. I've got the favorite here. Number 21, Navy, 4.5-point favorites over Pittsburgh, Monday, December 28th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Now, you probably all know the story of Navy and Keenan Reynolds and their option offense this year, as they've been hard to ignore. If not for a loss to Houston, they'd be playing in a New Year's Six Bowl. But this is another chance for Reynolds to add to the NCAA career rushing touchdown totals, but he will be facing a top 20 rushing defense. Navy's held bowl teams USF, Tulsa, and Memphis to 21 points or less, so they are pretty good. Really, only Houston and Notre Dame, both losses, were the teams that could score on Navy. They even shut down Paxton Lynch of Memphis. Now, for Pittsburgh, Nate Peterman is not a good enough quarterback to beat them. The best they can hope for is to get the ball to Tyler Boyd and hope he gets a couple hundred yards. And yeah, Pitt's faced one triple option team in Georgia Tech this year, and they got the win by a field goal. But Georgia Tech absolutely dominated Pitt on the ground. And Navy is far, far superior in that they actually have a defense compared to Georgia Tech. And Keenan Reynolds is far superior too. Even with Niumatalolo possibly off to BYU between now and then, Pitt's offense is too inconsistent, and I just don't see Keenan Reynolds losing his last career start.
Yeah, and like you said, Pittsburgh's already faced the similar wishbone offense that runs the triple option when they beat Georgia Tech earlier in the season back in October. And surely I agree, Navy's a better team than Georgia Tech was this season. But most of what makes Navy a team that wins a lot of games is teams trying to prepare for that wishbone offense and that triple option, especially if you haven't seen it before. And what you see a lot of times is when you play two wishbone offenses, two teams that run the triple option in the same season, teams tend to do better that second time when they face it because they've already faced it in a real-life game. You look at just this season, Notre Dame beat Georgia Tech by just a touchdown, and then a couple weeks later, they beat Navy by 17 when they faced that triple option for a second team. Pittsburgh's going to have plenty of time to be able to prepare for this Navy triple option. I think that they'll be able to at least keep this game pretty close and be able to stop that run, especially given that they have the 20th ranked rushing defense, like you mentioned. Navy's going to live and die by the running game of Keenan Reynolds. I think Pittsburgh's a very, very good defense that is going to be sophisticated enough to be able to recognize that and be able to stop them. And the only higher ranked rush defense that they've faced all season is Houston, who's one spot ahead of Pitt at number 19. And Navy lost to Houston 52-31. So I think we can see something similar with Pitt. They won't win by that much because they don't have as good an offense as Houston does, but I think Pitt's going to be very prepared for this triple option. All right, in our 12th ranked bowl, we have the resurrected Holy War between Utah and BYU. They're going to be playing in the Royal Purple Las Vegas Bowl on Saturday, December 19th at 3:30 p.m. on ABC. Luke, Utah and BYU here, they're obviously bitter rivals, so they know each other pretty well going back, and a lot of these guys grew up in Utah being very Mormon-based universities, but Utah, they're not going to try to play down to an opponent like this, especially given that it's such a big rivalry. BYU, on the other hand, they can't be happy about losing their head coach, Bronco Mendenhall, who somehow believes that Virginia job is a step up from the BYU gig. So there's a lot of unrest there with the BYU program right now. If I'm a BYU fan, I would rather just have Bronco Mendenhall gone because he's actually coaching this game before he goes over to Virginia. And his focus now is on Virginia recruitment, not necessarily winning this big rivalry game in the Las Vegas Bowl. So at least if you have a coordinator be the interim coach, you have someone who's actually preparing for something here. But for BYU, the perils of being the independent team is that you schedule your toughest games up front. So late in the schedule, they didn't play a lot of tough competition at the end. They started the season 2-2 with wins over Nebraska and UCLA. Michigan team, mind you, that BYU lost to 31 to nothing, and Utah beat 24-17. So the only two bowl teams that they've even faced are 6-6 UConn and 5-7 San Jose State. I just don't think they have faced enough good competition this season to prove anything as to why they should be able to beat a very, very good Utah team.
Yeah, certainly an interesting one here, but what Bronco Mendenhall does have to play for is that he's seeking his 100th victory at BYU before taking off for UVA. Now, at BYU, Tanner Mangum has been stellar at quarterback this year. He's thrown over 3,000 yards and 21 touchdowns. They're not going to run the ball too much, but what they will do is air it out against you with explosive, big yardage passes, which is what they're going to have to do in a shootout if they're going to win this game. And Utah has a really good defense, but they are very, very susceptible to the pass, coming in at 96th in the country. Probably not as good as UCLA's defense, who BYU lost by 1-2, but they will absolutely need to keep the ball out of BYU's offense here if you're Utah. And that's going to be very hard without their best running back in Devontae Booker. Really, I don't see too much difference between the teams overall quality-wise, but I could take BYU to win straight up off of recent trends. BYU scored 103 points in their last 2 games, and Utah really hasn't played any impressive games in the past couple of months outside of beating Washington by 11. Throw in the rivalry aspect, the Mendenhall factor, this is prime for an upset.
All right, our 11th ranked bowl game here is the Advocare B100 Texas Bowl. This is going to be played Tuesday, December 29th at 9 p.m. on ESPN, and will feature number 20 LSU against a very good offense in Texas Tech. And Luke, with LSU, simply put, Leonard Fournette is going to run through this awful Texas Tech defense like a fat kid to the ice cream truck. Texas Tech is one of the highest scoring teams this season, but their defense is embarrassingly bad. They're 125th ranked in points allowed per game, 114th ranked in passing yards allowed per game, 126th in rushing yards allowed per game. Oh, and Leonard Fournette is going to be the one that's going to be rushing against this terrible rush defense. He's foaming at the mouth right now looking at how much the Red Raiders give up. 271.8 per game. That's a 12-game average of 271 rushing yards that they've allowed all per game this season. Running backs who have had their best games of the season against Texas Tech this year: Alex Collins of Arkansas, Wendell Smallwood of West Virginia, Chris Warren of Texas, Shock Linwood of Baylor, DeAndre Mann of Kansas, Samaje Perine of Oklahoma, and Joe Mixon of Oklahoma. So teams have their best rushing games against Texas Tech, and we're talking about one of the best running backs in the country. Fournette's season high this year is 244 yards against Syracuse, so watch for Fournette to absolutely destroy Texas Tech, especially given the cloud of Les Miles staying or going. No longer distraction for this team. LSU is a very good team. We talked about them as a national championship contender, and Fournette has to be happy with this matchup.
Yeah, Tim, this is a tough sell at plus 7.5 for the Red Raiders. But Texas Tech, they've got quite possibly the best offense in the country and an absolutely abysmal defense, particularly against the run. Only Eastern Michigan and Idaho are worse. And that's definitely LSU's strong point. But who gives the Red Raiders a chance is Patrick Mahomes. He's put up 4,283 yards this year and 32 touchdowns, and he's led the second-rated scoring offense in the country. But LSU, their defense is just too good, though they are a little bit worse at stopping the pass. I fully expect LSU to absolutely dominate Tech's defense, but I would strongly encourage you to watch Texas Tech's offense because they are fast and they are fun to watch. And I guess if I'm going to give you something, here's my betting stat for you. In LSU's last 4 games, 3 of them being losses, they haven't scored more than 19 points. On the season, they've averaged 30.7 per game. Texas Tech is the only Power 5 team to score at least 25 points every game this year, and that is within the spread here. Top 10 for our bowl rankings. Buffalo Wild Wings Citrus Bowl, you've got 2 traditional powerhouses, 2 surprising seasons, and 2 outstanding defenses facing off in Orlando. Michigan being the 4.5-point favorite over Florida. Catch this game New Year's Day at 1 p.m. Eastern on ABC. Now, for Michigan, this has actually been a fantastic first year under Jim Harbaugh for the Wolverines, considering they didn't even make a bowl game last year. Yeah, they lost early to Utah. They had the crazy finish to Sparty and then got dominated by the Ohio State. Aside from that game, it's really been all about their defense this year, as they put up 3 straight shutouts this year, largely due to the play of safety Jabril Peppers. He's also gotten 18 carries and returns punts for him. But keep an eye out because his current status is unknown for this game. The offense has really improved in the second half under Jake Rudock. He's got 2,700 yards on the season, thrown for 9 touchdowns in the last 3 games. Florida, on the other hand, their game plan's been to stifle opponents' offense and hope for a score or 2 as their offense is just flat out embarrassing. That worked against Ole Miss, but against other ranked teams in LSU, FSU, and Bama, each of those teams put up at least 27 points. I really think the difference maker in this one is going to be field goals, and Florida is absolutely woeful. They might make 1 out of 3, and Michigan is 80% on the year. Really a coin flip, but I'd take Michigan's offense here.
Yeah, and this is definitely going to be a defensive slugfest as both teams are very good against the pass, which I guess won't matter too much because both have subpar passing games, and both are very good against the run, which again shouldn't be too helpful because both teams struggle to move the ball. Really, it's just two great defenses against two subpar offenses. Perhaps the difference here is that Florida has a higher defensive efficiency rating and a positive turnover margin compared to Michigan, who has turned the ball over more than they have forced turnovers. So Florida can get some turnovers here and set up some touchdowns, then Florida has a great chance of winning this game. Florida has 3 top 30 wins against Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Georgia, while Michigan has fell flat. They're 0-3 against the top 30 with early season loss to Utah, as you said, a blowout against Ohio State, and the whole area has lost to Michigan State. But this isn't exactly the same defense that had 3 straight shutouts in October. That plus they should have lost to Minnesota and Indiana this season. They squeaked by with wins there. So Michigan has not played well against better competition, so I expect them to fall flat against the SEC Florida team.
Number 9 for us is the Outback Bowl, Friday, January 1st at noon Eastern on ESPN2. Pitt's number 23 Tennessee, 8.5-point favorites over number 13 Northwestern. Really a bit of a disappointing season for Tennessee as they were expected to contend in a down year in the SEC East, but they come into this winners of 5 straight. They've got a really balanced offense with Josh Dobbs at quarterback. He can pass and he can run, but Tennessee's strength has been their rushing game with Jalen Hurd and Alvin Kamara. It's going to be tough to get those yards against Northwestern, though, because he would much rather run than pass, a lot like Northwestern's offense. Both of these teams have top 50 defenses. Decided edge going to Northwestern there. Tennessee definitely has the better offense. Now, look, Northwestern has gotten bad lines since they play so ugly, but they've won a lot of them. But Tennessee is in the exact same boat and routinely fails to score more than 27 points. If you look at special teams, both their teams' field goal units are at 69%. Ultimately, I've got Tennessee with the win thanks to a more efficient offense and better punt and kick return teams, but I do not expect them to cover in this game.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly Tennessee deserves to be favored in this game. I'm not going to argue that Northwestern is definitely going to beat them straight up because they just don't score enough points. And with the exceptions of the big losses to Michigan and Iowa, they have played a lot of close games, including a win the first week of the season against Stanford, who would have been in the playoff maybe if Northwestern didn't win that game. 5 of their wins have been within 1 score, so they just rely on their defense to win games. And in terms of a cover against Tennessee, as long as they can hold them to 20 points, they should be able to grab the cover because they do score at least enough to win games if they can hold them to not a lot of points. And if you believe that the Northwestern defense truly is legitimate, then this could be a good pick against the spread. And if you believe that they'll get at least some points offensively, I wouldn't bet them straight up, but certainly they'll keep it close. All right, let's get to our first New Year's Six Bowl. Coming in at number 8 is the All-State Sugar Bowl. It's going to be on New Year's Day at 8:30 p.m. on ESPN. This is going to have number 12 Ole Miss and number 16 Oklahoma State. So, Luke, I got Ole Miss here. It's 7.5-point spread. And there's no doubt that this game is going to be a shootout, considering both teams are in the top 15 in points scored per game this season. And both are top 10 in passing yardage per game this season. The difference is that Oklahoma State defense is absolutely atrocious, and Ole Miss can actually make stops from time to time. In the Pokes' final 5 games, they gave up 29 or more points every game, including giving up over 50 points twice. So Oklahoma State, they had a chance to make playoff. They completely blew it. So they're a downtrending team right now. They've lost their last 2 games. Meanwhile, Ole Miss's win-loss record is almost a series of unlucky circumstances. They had to face Florida back when they had a competent quarterback in Will Grier, lost that game. They had to lose to a fully healthy Memphis team when they were still undefeated, and they had to travel to Memphis for that game. And they lost to a surging Arkansas team, like I said earlier, one of the best teams in the SEC in the last few weeks, on a just incredible lucky lateral in overtime. So they've had a little bit of bad luck when you look at their win-loss record. But make no mistake, I think Ole Miss is the better team than Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma State's been exposed once they finally got to their difficult part of the schedule. I think they're going to struggle again in this game against Ole Miss.
Yeah, Tim, Pokes are going to be another tough sell here. Even though you've seen a lights-out offense from them early on to the middle part of the season, it started to decline towards the end here. And they're coming in dropping their last 2 games of the season at home to Baylor by 10 and Oklahoma by 35. They do not look hot coming into this. It's absolutely critical for the Cowboys to get the passing game going and on top of a struggling offensive line. But the good news for Oklahoma State is that Robert Kimdiche, the country's best defensive tackle for Ole Miss, is questionable, having fallen out of a window 15 feet and in the hospital right now. So keep an eye out for his status. Also great that Mason Rudolph is likely to be healthy after foot surgery. They need him to be the passer, J.W. Walsh to run in their two-quarterback system. In my opinion, Ole Miss's defense and secondary is a bit overrated. They have NFL talent, but their offense has been so good that teams have been forced to pass against them in playing catch-up this year. And Arkansas, Auburn, and LSU did have success with it, and they've allowed 300 yards or more in 4 of their last 6. And Oklahoma State's going to be the best passing offense they've faced all year. Throwing that Gundy's Pokes have won 4 of their last 5 bowls, no reason they can't hang with the Rebels here.
All right, the 7th best bowl game, according to Tim and Luke, is the Valero Alamo Bowl. It's the only pick'em of the bowl season if you're looking at the Red Pools spreads. This is going to be played on Saturday, January 2nd at 6:45 p.m. on ESPN. This one has number 11 TCU and number 15 Oregon. And Luke, with TCU, they're both top 10 offenses. So whatever you can say about how good TCU and Oregon offenses are might be moot because there's just going to be a lot of points. There's going to be a lot of points here. So with TCU, first, they lost 2 games, not because they were bad in those games, but because Trevon Boykin, the quarterback, was hurt, kind of missed some games. He was banged up for others, and Josh Doxson's missed some games. He's a tremendous playmaker. But Boykin is going to be fully healthy for this game, given the rest, given the time off. And he played again at the end of the season, so he had come back. And dynamic receiver Doxson, he's at least hopeful that he'll be out there on the field. And even if Doxson isn't out there, Kevontae Turpin's an excellent receiver. Aaron Green, a very solid running back. And given that we should be able to see this prototypical TCU offense that we've come to know over the last few years on display in this Alamo Bowl, I have to note that Oregon has the 116th ranked defense this season. So this is a defense that TCU should be able to exploit and score a lot of points on, probably more points than Oregon might be able to. And among some of the better Pac-12 offenses that Oregon faced this season, they lost to Washington State, and they barely grabbed victories over Washington and Stanford. So TCU, I think they have the better ability to make stops against Oregon's offense, as evidenced by the Baylor game, and a shootout that can make all the difference.
Yeah, but really, what's not to like about Oregon right now? They're winners of 6 straight, including beating both Pac-12 conference championship game participants in Stanford and USC, and they've got an offense firing on all cylinders led by Vernon Adams Jr. The only concern, as you mentioned, is their defense. They're giving up 37 points and 480 yards per game. So it's kind of weird to say that TCU has a better defense than somebody, but there you have it. Oregon's offense here definitely gets the nod thanks to a balanced attack with Royce Freeman out of the backfield. Honestly, this is an absolute toss-up and should be a pick-em. It's going to be a shootout game that really just comes down to who you like more offensively. Here, I'll take Oregon since they put up more points consistently down the stretch late, as the last time they scored less than 38 in a game was mid-October in a win over Washington. Throw in that they're 5-0 against the spread at home. Yeah, it's against the spread, but it's a pick 'em here. They're 5-0 against it. I'd take them here. Coming in at number 6 on our bowl selections, the Russell Athletic Bowl. I've got Baylor in this one, 3.5-point favorites over ACC conference game participant North Carolina. Catch this one Tuesday, December 29th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. And look, Baylor, they come into this having lost 3 of their last 4 to Oklahoma, TCU, and Texas. But you can put a win against Oklahoma State in there. The biggest thing to watch for in this game is if quarterback Jarrett Stidham, that's backup quarterback Jarrett Stidham, will be able to return from injury for it. If it's Chris Johnson or wide receiver Lynx Hawthorne who you saw play against Texas, I don't like their chances at all. Regardless, where the Bears have excelled at is running the football. They're 4th in the country, right behind Navy. And North Carolina is 118th nationally at stopping it. So really, just expect to get a heavy dose of Shock Linwood here, and whoever's throwing, they're going to get to target 2 fantastic receivers in Corey Coleman and KD Cannon. Now, UNC has a good offense in their own right with Marquise Williams, and I expect them to score on Baylor's average defense. The only question here is, can Baylor keep up against UNC's defense? They really didn't face any elite offenses until Clemson. So, can UNC hang in there? I don't know. Who's going to play quarterback for Baylor? it's way too early to pick this game for me.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of my point with North Carolina too. Is Baylor's basically playing their B team right now with their whole team just decimated by injuries, and a lot of their success was based on Seth Russell at the quarterback because he was playing at a Heisman level and then he got hurt mid-season. And this isn't a scenario like Ohio State last year where they had a fairy tale ending with their third string quarterback. I mean their backup quarterback Jared Stidham, who may or may not play, it's to be seen. He was competent, but he wasn't Seth Russell level. He wasn't tremendous, and he's more of a future project than he is right now and in a bowl game. Chris Johnson was absolutely terrible as the third string, and he got concussed against Texas. And so that they didn't use any red shirts, they used a junior wide receiver, Lynx Hawthorne, who had to come in and finish the game. He hadn't thrown the ball in a meaningful football game since his junior year of high school. So he wasn't even good enough to be the starter his senior year of high school, so let alone for a 17th ranked Baylor offense. And not to mention Corey Coleman, Chuck Linwood, they're both banged up at the end of the season. Who knows if they're fully healthy going into the bowl game. Meanwhile, UNC, they held tough against top-ranked teams in the country, against the top-ranked team in the country against Clemson, falling to the bowl game only due to a phantom offside call. And, Baylor's 77th ranked pass defense, I don't think it's going to be a match for this deep threat attack from Marquise Williams, Ryan Switzer, Mac Hollins. And Marquise feels like if he feels like running that day, Baylor might get blown out, let alone lose to an underdog.
Number 5, the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl in Atlanta pits Florida State 7.5-point favorites over the 18th ranked Houston Cougars. Thursday, December 31st at noon on ESPN. The Seminoles are playing very well right now. Once they got Dalvin Cook back from injury and turned the offense over to Sean McGuire at quarterback from Everett Golson, look, Dalvin Cook is absolutely explosive. However, I do think he's going to have a tough day against the top 20 Houston rushing defense. But on the flip side, Houston hasn't faced anyone like Dalvin Cook yet. He alone is so explosive. He averages 150 yards per game and nearly 8 yards per carry. The rest of FSU's offense, they aren't world beaters by any means, but they're getting the job done, and they're hugely aided by their own top 15 defense. It's a huge opportunity for Houston in this one to knock off a P5 program that expected to play for a national title, and that half point is tricky to play with the talent of Greg Ward Jr. and Kenneth Farrell on the other side of the field. A lot of intangibles at play here, but as far as that half point goes, if you expect FSU to win, their average margin of victory in their 10 wins this season was 21.5 points.
Yeah, and look, beginning with the 2006 season when the BCS started mandating that a non-power conference team in the top 12 of the BCS standings would get an automatic bid, and that carried over to the New Year's Six with a Group of 5 team getting in, excluding the Boise State over TCU game in 2009, since both were non-power conference teams. Schools outside the power conferences have been 5-2 straight up over power conference teams in these bowl games because they have so much motivation, and they rely on these games for their recruiting so much that Houston has so much motivation going into this game. Their offense is one of the best in the country thanks to the explosive playmaking abilities of Greg Ward Jr. and a plethora of wide receivers led by DeMarcus Ayers, and a running game that if Kenneth Farrell is playing, he's going to be very good. Their only loss of the season came to UConn, but that was because Kyle Postman was the starting quarterback as Ward Jr. was hurt. But he laid all those injury concerns to rest when he beat up on a tough Temple defense in the AAC championship game just a week and a half ago. Florida State has not had an answer for quarterbacks who can rush the ball over the past 2 seasons. Look at Marcus Mariota in the Rose Bowl last year, Deshaun Watson earlier this season, and Greg Ward Jr. is just as good as either one of those quarterbacks. So I don't know if the Seminoles are going to be able to contain him in this Peach Bowl. All right, at number 4 here, we are at the final stretch. We have the Battle Frog Fiesta Bowl. This one's going to be played on New Year's Day at 1 p.m. on ESPN. This one pits the Notre Dame Fighting Irish against the Ohio State University Buckeyes. And Luke, I have Ohio State here, and if there was any question about the Ohio State players quitting after that Sparty loss, as I had mentioned as a likely possibility, the notion got thrown out the window when they beat Michigan big in the Big House, and then the fact that multiple players teased Chris Ash that he still had one more game to coach before heading to Rutgers. So no matter where Urban Meyer's coaching, he wins bowl games. He's 9-2 combined for Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, and Ohio State. So he knows how to keep his players focused. And I think that he will be able to keep these players focused in this last game against the Irish. Look, Ohio State's a very good team. They struggled to find their groove offensively, especially at the quarterback position. But they have a tremendous running back in Ezekiel Elliott. And this is the only team that's been able to stop Ezekiel Elliott this season is Michigan State. And while Notre Dame doesn't have a bad rush defense, they are nowhere near the level that Michigan State is. And I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to be able to run over them in this game, especially considering he has clearly stated that this is going to be his last game as an Ohio State Buckeye. And look, they're going to get creative. Guys like Braxton Miller, I 100% guarantee that he will have a passing touchdown in this game and that Ohio State will be able to win by a touchdown.
Yeah, Tim, the only thing that I have to question here is what's the motivation for Ohio State? It's been an absolutely incredible for Notre Dame to be here considering the injuries that they've had all season. If not for a last-second field goal to Stanford, they'd be in the playoffs. Ohio State was potentially playing for a spot in the playoffs against Michigan. Their only other loss was to Clemson. That was a combined margin of 4 points for Notre Dame to Clemson and Stanford. And Ohio State here, they're going to be out without Adolphus Washington, which is actually pretty huge. Deshaun Kaiser to Will Fuller has been phenomenal all year, and Deshaun can run it when he wants to. They have the talent on offense, but like you said, their defense is quite a bit outmatched here. But they've still kept points scored against them down this year. They got a middle-of-the-road rushing defense for the Irish. I expect a lot of runs to Zeke Elliott against them, and C.J. Prosise getting a lot of runs for the Irish as well. Notre Dame's good on third downs. Ohio State is a little bit susceptible in that department. If Notre Dame can put a few drives together, they're hanging right in there.
All right, next up we got the granddaddy of them all, but this year we have it ranked at the number 3 spot in the bowl rankings. Playing the Rose Bowl once again on January 1st at 5 o'clock p.m., and you can find this one on ESPN. We got a traditional Rose Bowl matchup this year with number 6 Stanford and number 5 Iowa, with Stanford being the 6.5-point favorite. And look, Iowa's defense has obviously been good enough to beat up on a weaker Big Ten West, but Stanford is the best team that they will face in every aspect of the game, I think, because they have a better offense than Michigan State. So while Stanford does not have really as good a defense as they faced in Michigan State, Stanford still ranks in the top 20 in points scored per game and top 40 in points allowed. So, and they have a top 10 most efficient offense in the country and the top 15 special teams in the country. And strength of schedule matters here again. I've mentioned that a lot. Iowa ranks 57th in strength of schedule, and they're only 1-1 against the top 30. Stanford, on the other hand, they rank 14th in strength of schedule with a top 10 win and is 5-1 against top 30, with Oklahoma and Alabama being the only other teams with 5+ wins. But Christian McCaffrey is one of the most versatile players in the country. He can beat you on offense and he can beat you on special teams. And the Iowa run game has been the biggest part of the Iowa offense, and they're banged up. Jordan Canzeri, he got hurt in the Big Ten championship. Akron Wadley's been hurting all year. LaShawn Daniels has been inconsistent. I don't know if they're going to be able to run the ball as efficiently as they have all season. That's why I like Stanford to be able to potentially win this game by at least a touchdown.
Yeah, Tim, Stanford is a great team with fantastic athletes that deserve conversation for the playoff, but there is a way to beat them, and that is to run the ball. Iowa can do that. Like you said, they've been banged up. They've got a month to prepare. Northwestern put up 225 yards on them and won. Oregon put up 231 and won. Notre Dame put up 299 on Stanford and nearly won. Yes, Iowa couldn't do it against Michigan State, but Michigan State is one of the few better teams, better than Iowa, at stopping it. Canzeri should be back here. You've seen LaShawn Daniels and Akron Wadley do it this year. They have the guys, and Stanford comes in at 44th nationally, but give up the most yards in their biggest games. And Iowa still got C.J. Beathard there to pass the ball. He's no slouch. Iowa really hasn't put together a bad game defensively all year. They've only allowed more than 200 yards once, and that was against Indiana. And they can defend the pass, too. This is really a fascinating matchup because both teams are built so similarly, and they're going to be playing the exact same way. I do think Stanford has the better individual athletes and the better offensive line, but they have a legit shot to win this straight up. Okay, number 2 on our list, the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Another matchup of similarly built teams, a rematch of the 2011 Capital One Bowl, and the second ever meeting between Alabama, the 9.5-point favorite, over Michigan State. Thursday, New Year's Eve, 8 o'clock Eastern on ESPN. Now, this is a phenomenal matchup for Alabama because you look at the teams that they fared well against in recent years, ones that are built to control the clock, a pocket passer that progresses through his reads, and reliant on their defense. That's where Alabama has shined. You all already know about Derrick Henry and the way he's gotten over 40 carries in his last couple of games and bruised defenses and absolutely kept this team alive this year and went on to win the Heisman. Will we see that against Michigan State? I really don't know. Only Air Force ran for over 200 yards on Sparty, and look, Air Force never passes. We talked about it before. So yeah, he'll get carries, but the passing game for Bama hasn't been absolutely anemic this year. Ever since the Ole Miss game, Jake Coker has really stepped it up. He's hit Calvin Ridley and Ardarius Stewart when it matters for moderate gains, and they've put together long clock-eating drives. Plus, with another month for Kenyon Drake to get healthy, they'll have more offensive options than what you saw at Bama in the Auburn and Florida games. On the other side of the ball, the defense is absolutely suffocating and hands down the best in the country. You do not run on them. They've only allowed 74 yards per game all year. You've got to beat them in the air, and Connor Cook may or may not come into this game still hurting with a shoulder injury. And his offensive line has been doing a pretty good job at protecting him, but Bama's defense has gotten 46 sacks with tremendous pressure on the line from that front seven and a real penchant for making negative plays. And Bama's secondary is just so vastly improved this year, and it's better than Michigan State's. Both teams have the stylings to run the exact same game here. Physical, grinded out play, long drives, and honestly, both teams' fans are going to get very frustrated with their offenses at times in this one. I think Alabama gets it done here from a talent perspective in a close one, but if you're playing the spread, keep in mind, Saban is 8-0 versus former assistants, and he's won every single one of those games by double digits.
Yeah, and both these teams have tremendous rush defenses to the point that it questions whether either team can even score in this game. They're that good. And look, Derrick Henry for Alabama, he's the Heisman winner. He's the best running back in the country. This is going to be the biggest test of his career, I think, because this is going to be the best rush defense that he's going to face. And some of the best running backs that Sparty's faced this year have had frustrating games. You know, you mentioned it. Air Force has the most rushing yards against them this year, and that's just a committee of running backs. Royce Freeman of Oregon really struggled against Michigan State, and Zeke Elliott of Ohio State was held to just 33 yards, which was his lowest total since a 2014 Virginia Tech loss, which he wasn't even the starter for at that point. So, you know, the Sparty rush defense, they're so punishing that it actually extends to citizen fans even getting hit by cars. So the Michigan State rush defense, they've only allowed two players to eclipse that 100-yard rushing mark this season, and both have barely eclipsed the 100-yard mark. So looking at the individual running backs, I think that Derrick Henry could get a little bit frustrated in this game. He's obviously going to get a lot of carries, though, so maybe he can get more yardage, but he's not going to get that average I think you would expect. And I can see that as great as Sparty's rush defense is, Bama's is somehow better, and Michigan State will certainly struggle to rush the ball. But they're getting healthier in the running game. You know, Madre London was supposed to be the guy that was going to be the guy that replaced Jeremy Langsford coming into the season. He's been hurt. He hasn't played a lot of games. He's been banged up. But L.J. Scott's stepped in there as well, and there's been a couple other guys. So as long as the Spartans can use this kind of running back committee that they've been doing lately, especially in the Ohio State and the Iowa games, they can be able to get 3 yards in a cloud of dust and be able to get enough yards, get enough points, and just hold them on when they're on defense. I do think that Alabama is the better team, but I'm not going to rule out another semifinal upset. You know, we all know what happened in the Sugar Bowl last year when Ohio State beat them and ended up going to the national title. But this is a 9.5-point spread, so if you're going to look at this from a betting standpoint as well, you like the underdog here, especially with the 9.5, and given how little I think that both of these teams are going to end up scoring here. And I think that the wild card here is you look back to the SEC media days when Nick Saban said that after these guys get their NFL draft grades, even in the Sugar Bowl last year, even in the semifinal, he saw players kind of give up a little bit. So at a minimum, those are some of the considerations you want to make when at least making a bet against the spread. I think Alabama's a better team, but look out for a Michigan State cover or upset here.
All right, number one on our list, the Capital One Orange Bowl in Miami, a rematch of last year's Russell Athletic Bowl, dominated by Clemson over Oklahoma. Fifth all-time meeting between these schools. Their record against each other is 2-2. Oklahoma comes in at the 3.5-point favorite. New Year's Eve, 4 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. Now, aside from a loss to Texas in October, who could have seen Oklahoma come out the way they did this year? Baker Mayfield has got to be coming in as one of the best quarterbacks in the country, thrown for over 3,300 yards, touchdown INT ratio of 35-5. That's absolutely insane, and he's got weapons all over the offense. Sterling Shepard and Dede Westbrook are fantastic receivers, and their top 8 guys in receptions all average double digits per catch. And the running game is ridiculous. Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon in the backfield have been beasts. Both of them average over 6 yards a carry. Tim, it's really hard to not sit here and gush about their offense. That's averaged nearly 46 points per game. Now, defensively, they'll come in as top 50 against the run in the past, but 31st in total yardage and 21st in scoring defense. They've held up well in the Big 12, allowing about 21 points per game and 350 yards per game. Now, Clemson does have the better unit defensively. I will give them that. And Deshaun Watson has been incredibly fun to watch. The real lingering questions that I have here about Oklahoma's wins is that they've come against backup quarterbacks. Their last best wins, Baylor, TCU, and Oklahoma State. Yeah, they got lucky not having to face the likes of Trevon Boykin, Seth Russell, and Mason Rudolph. But the deal is they won the games. Oklahoma's offense right now is so far above anything that Clemson has faced this year, probably the closest being UNC. And we saw how close that one was. But overall, I have got to go with the Sooners here. They're more physical. Their offense is not only more explosive, but it's also been a heck of a lot more consistent than Clemson's. Add in that Clemson goes run happy out of the spread like a lot of Big 12 teams. I think Oklahoma's 3-4 defense is adequately built and experienced enough to contain him. They also just feel like the hot team right now.
Yeah, Luke, and like you said, Oklahoma has terrific offense, as does Clemson. So whether it's fair or not, this game's going to draw a lot of parallels and comparisons to last year's Rose Bowl, and Clemson getting compared to that Florida State team that got trounced by a great offense, Marcus Mariota, led by Oregon last year, and considering that they were both undefeated as ACC teams, which is a little bit lower competition than maybe you find in the Big 12, Big 10, SEC. But statistically speaking, Clemson is a better team than maybe that Florida State team last year, and I think that Oregon was a better offense than this Oklahoma team this year. So maybe that comparison is not there. But Deshaun Watson's putting up tremendous numbers this season. I think that he's better than Jameis Winston even in his Heisman year from last year. And Wayne Gallman, the running back, like you said, they have a great running game with Gallman back there. He's got tremendous escapability, and Deshaun Watson just gives the Tigers a strong backup running back there, too, because he can either throw the ball or he can do a lot of things running the ball. Plus, they have a lot of receivers with Artavis Scott, Deion Kane, Sharon Peake, Jordan Leggett. I mean, they got a lot of players out there that are going to complement Deshaun's abilities. And while Oklahoma ranks in the top 20 in strength of schedule with the Big 12, a lot of that space, like you said, they faced a lot of B teams at the end of the season. They did not face the starting quarterbacks. They have not faced a quarterback quite like Deshaun Watson this season. So a lot of that's going to come into play. And this is the same team that lost to Texas midseason. Texas, who didn't even make a bowl game. I mean, you can say whatever you want about, Nebraska with Michigan State and whatnot, but Texas is a terrible football team, and Oklahoma was not able to do anything against them midseason. And, with Oklahoma, like you said, Baker Mayfield, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. They have a top 5 passing game behind him. And, they have outstanding wide receiver with Sterling Shepard. But Clemson is a top 5 pass defense, and they're in the top 25 in rush defense. So they have the defense that can be able to stop Mayfield, Shepard, P. Ryan, all these other guys, Joe Mixon. And Baker Mayfield at the end of last season, the last 3 games of this season, he played himself out of New York. He didn't look great in those final couple games, even though he did look good after the Texas loss. I think that the Clemson defense is going to be too much for him. And look, Clemson, they're the number 1 team in the country, and they're undefeated, and they're the underdogs. So look for Clemson to be very competitive in this one and possibly win this.
All right, that's going to do it for us this week. We've had fun going over all 40 bowls. We put a lot of time into going back, watching the games, looking at the stats for all these teams. I'm certainly excited for bowl season to get underway here in the next few days. Tim, any final thoughts to add?
Yeah, Luke, this was a lot of fun. It was good to get through every single one of those bowl games and give a short preview on all 80 teams. This was kind of a special episode for us. We'll be back next week with our regular segments, and I will surely be back next week with the TNT drinking game. Took a week off from that this week. If you're looking for a bowl pick'em out there to be able to put this knowledge to use, www.reddpools, that's reddpools.com/collegebowl. And feel free to hit us up on Twitter or email. The Twitter is @TheTNTPod, and the email is tuesdaynighttailgate@gmail.com. Hit us up with any suggestions, comments, feedback, etc. I'm looking forward to bowl season as well, Luke, and I'm especially looking forward to these New Year's 6 games.
As am I, Tim. Once again, thanks again for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time. We'll be back next week with some of our regular features. Take care. Good luck with college football bowl pools if you're participating, and certainly enjoy this season. Thanks for listening. Good night.